for the future of our economy, to grow the economy, to benefit Canadians. And in this House, the role of the official opposition is to challenge that vision, is to look at how they would do things differently. But they don't even want to talk about it. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because they have no plan for our economy, and we have grown the economy and created jobs.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister is going to such great lengths to prevent the full story from coming out. And in a few hours, we'll find out just how much it's going to cost Canadians to distract from his own corruption scandal. That's right. He's lost 2 ministers, his principal advisor. He's lost the clerk of the Privy Council. They are now lawyering up in the Prime Minister's office, and he's instructed his members on the Justice Committee behind closed doors to shut down the investigation. What could he possibly be trying to hide that is worse than all those things happening already?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite just admitted it, that he doesn't want to hear what's in the budget coming up in a few hours. And the reason is because they do not understand that investing in the middle class is the way to grow a stronger economy. That's what's created over 900,000 new jobs. That's what's led to the lowest unemployment in almost 40 years, Mr. Speaker. Our plan is working to help the middle class. Their plan to give advantages and benefits to the wealthy failed under Stephen Harper, and it's failing them now to actually even be able to talk about the budget.
Order. I encourage the member for Carleton and others not to interrupt when someone else has the floor. I'm sure they wouldn't want someone to interrupt them. The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know appointing a former Liberal cabinet minister is a weak attempt to change the channel from the scandal. It doesn't get to the bottom of Liberals giving special access to big corporations, quietly passing laws when powerful lobbyists ask, and potentially interfering with a criminal trial. People deserve answers. Why won't the Liberal Prime Minister call for a public inquiry? What is he so afraid of?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
What's puzzling in this whole thing is I could see the Conservatives not standing up for workers, but the NDP not standing for workers, not standing up for jobs across the country. We have always and we will consistently stand up to defend workers, stand up to defend hardworking Canadians and the communities that they support. We will be unequivocal about making sure that we're growing the economy, creating jobs like the 900,000 new jobs that Canadians have created over the past 3 years. We will continue to focus on what matters for Canadians because that's what Canadians expect.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's interference scandal is taking quite a toll. In just 1 month, he has lost 2 ministers, his chief advisor, and now the clerk of the Privy Council. And he's lost the confidence of Canadians. And what's his proposed solution? A former Liberal minister who's a party fundraiser. How does the Prime Minister think that's going to restore Canadians' confidence? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Instead of talking politics, the member should be focusing on what Canadians have gained in 3 years. We have created some 900,000 new jobs. We have raised 300,000 children out of poverty. We have helped raise 825,000 Canadians out of poverty because of the steps we've taken to help their families, their communities. We've restored their confidence in the future. We will continue to support workers and to invest in Canadians. That's what Canadians expect from us, and we will keep doing it. The Honourable Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister owes people an explanation. The Prime Minister is in the middle of a political interference scandal, a scandal where the allegation is that the Prime Minister pushed legislation through the back door to help his rich cronies. How does he think that Canadians can have confidence in a former Liberal minister from the sponsorship scandal days to find the truth? The Honourable Prime Minister. I think the leader of the NDP should explain, and not just to people in Quebec, but to people all over Canada, the fact that he really couldn't care less about people's jobs. We here on this side of the House, in government, will always work for workers. We will always defend workers. We will work with them, and we will continue to defend and invest in jobs. It may make many others wealthier too, but we will continue to work on behalf of Canadians.
Alors.
Order. Order.
Order. The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge will come to order. L'honorable député de Burnaby South.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Deserve to know the truth. Back in 2004, it was Anne McClellan defending her scandal-plagued Liberal government. Now, we have another Liberal government plagued by scandal, obstructing the Justice Committee from learning the truth. Mr. Speaker, at least previous Prime Ministers called inquiries when they were faced with scandals. Why is this Liberal Prime Minister refusing to let Canadians learn the truth through a public inquiry?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
On this side of the House, we have confidence in the committees and their work. We have confidence in the officers of Parliament, like the Ethics Commissioner and the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. We respect the work that the Justice Committee did for 5 weeks, hearing hours and hours of testimony, and indeed, we even took the unprecedented step of providing a waiver for solicitor-client privilege and attorney-client privilege so that the former Attorney General could speak to the matter before the committee. These are things that we know Canadians need, and that is why we provided them. At the same time, we focus.
The honourable member for Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Prime Minister spins an incredible story, and indeed it is incredible because it is not true. Let's take a tale of the tape, shall we? 2 cabinet ministers have resigned from cabinet. 1 resignation of the best friend, the principal secretary to the Prime Minister, and 1 early retirement of the clerk of the Privy Council. This is extraordinary in normal circumstances, and Canadians deserve to know exactly what is going on. But this morning, the Prime Minister has made sure that the Justice Committee, the only public venue studying this matter, was shut down. What is he afraid of? Why is he covering it up?
Honourable Prime Minister. The Honourable House Leader.
Clearly that members of the Justice Committee have been studying this issue for over 5 weeks. We know that they have asked for witnesses to appear to ensure that Canadians could hear from those witnesses, including the former Attorney General. We waived solicitor-client privilege as well as cabinet confidence. Mr. Speaker, that is unheard of. It's only happened 4 times since 1987. The last time under Stephen Harper is a time where he actually didn't waive all privileges because perhaps it's the Conservatives who have something to hide. That is not our approach. We'll focus on Canadians while they focus on tactics. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Milton.
So, Mr. Speaker, let's just level with Canadians. Something happened after January 14th that terrifies this government. They'll go to great extents to ensure that we never hear about it, but we will, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Global Affairs indicated that with respect to the concerns of the OECD, she was going to assure them by saying that the process was both robust and independent. How can the minister tell us today that after they shut down the Justice Committee that this is anything towards robust?
Honourable Government House Leader.
It's important that Canadians know that when it comes to our parliamentary committees, they actually work independently of this place. There's members of Parliament that are from all organized parties that sit within these committees, including the Justice Committee. When we had witnesses appearing, we saw that members of other parties were also able to present present themselves and ask questions of witnesses. It's important that Canadians also know that there is the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner that's also looking into this matter, and the independence of the judicial system, because there is an ongoing court case. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Charlesbourg.
The honourable member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the former Attorney General resigned from Cabinet because the Prime Minister's office was pressuring her into circumventing the law. The former President of the Treasury Board resigned because she had lost confidence, quote unquote. In addition, Gerald Butts and the Clerk of the Privy Council have also resigned. Strange. But the Prime Minister says there's no corruption in the SNC-Lavalin affair. If that's true, why all the resignations? Why won't he let the former Attorney General speak her whole truth? Why not? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, we know that the members on the Justice Committee have done their work. They sat for 5 weeks on this case. The Ethics Commissioner's Office is still dealing with this matter. We know there are many ways in which this work will be done, but the Conservatives don't want to talk about the over 900,000 jobs that have been created since we took office. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad she's talking about the Justice Committee. I've been on that committee for the past 5 weeks, and the Liberals have been controlled by the Prime Minister's office. They have been prevented from shedding full light on this matter. The former Attorney General had an order that prevented her from talking freely about everything, whereas other witnesses were unrestrained. Why has the Attorney General not been allowed to talk about the period from January 14th to mid-February? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, we waived Cabinet confidence and solicitor-client privilege so that the former Attorney General could share and give her evidence before the committee. I think that the member opposite knows from experience that it's their leader that gives orders to their members. But on our side, members can do their work properly, unfettered, and they will continue to do that work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Chilliwack Hope.
Liberals on the Justice Committee wrote in a letter last night saying, quote, as committee members, we have achieved our objectives with respect to these meetings. Well, I'll say they have, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal objective during this whole scandal has been to cover up for their Prime Minister's corruption. Not only will they not allow the Attorney General to fully tell her story, they're shutting down the entire investigation. What is the Prime Minister so afraid of that he's willing to sink to these depths to cover up his corruption?
Honourable Government House Leader.
It's clear that the member has a copy of that letter but does not respect the choice of those members. But we also do know that when it comes to the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, that office is looking into this matter. We also know that there is an ongoing court case. But, Mr. Speaker, what is clear is that the Conservatives are covering up the fact that they don't have a plan. They don't want to talk about the 300,000 children that have been lifted out of poverty. They don't want to talk about the 900,000 jobs that have been created by Canadians since this government came into office, because we invest in Canadians rather than have the approach of austerity of the Conservatives.
The honourable member for Chilliwack Hope.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's corrupt actions on the SNC-Lavalin affair have created a Liberal government cesspool of chaos and cover-ups. The former Attorney General has resigned. The President of the Treasury Board has resigned. The Clerk of the Privy Council has resigned. The Prime Minister's closest advisor has resigned. Other than that, it's going really well, and there's nothing to see here, Mr. Speaker. Today, they've shut down the investigation. Why are they so afraid of Canadians getting to the truth of this Liberal corruption?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner is investigating this matter. We know that there is an ongoing court case. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, what we will focus on is Canadians. We know that Canadians have created 900,000 300,000 jobs since we took government. We know that 300,000 children have been lifted out of poverty. We know that over 800,000 Canadians have been lifted out of poverty. We know that there's 9 million Canadians whose income taxes have gone down since we lowered taxes on middle-class Canadians by increasing them on the wealthiest 1% of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, it's Canadians who send us here. That's who we focus on.
Honourable member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, this morning Liberal MPs on the Justice Committee shut down the study over the PMO's interference scandal for good. Their message is clear. Liberals don't believe that Canadians deserve to know what happened. Are they serious? The NDP strongly believes that Canadians deserve the truth. The former Attorney General wants to reappear before the committee and speak her whole truth. The Prime Minister is refusing to let this happen. The only way we will ever know the truth is through an independent public inquiry. Will the Prime Minister launch one now? Yes or no? Yes.
Honourable Government House Leader.
Justice Committee actually spent 5 weeks looking at this issue. They had witnesses appear throughout those 5 weeks. Every single meeting where witnesses appear were in public because Canadians should get to hear. And to ensure that Canadians were able to hear, this Prime Minister waived solicitor-client privilege as well as cabinet confidence to ensure that the former Attorney General could speak. Mr. Speaker, Canadians should also know that the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner is investigating this matter. They should also know that there is an ongoing court case. We on this side have respect and confidence in our institutions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Essex.
2 senior cabinet ministers, the chief advisor and the most senior public servant in the country have resigned. But Liberals want us to think there's nothing to see here. The ethics commissioner's duties are limited and investigating political interference isn't part of their job. Now that Liberal MPs have shut down the study at the Justice Committee, the only choice left is an independent public inquiry. Canadians want the truth. They deserve better than this. Will the Prime Minister allow an independent public inquiry into the interference scandal in his office? Yes or no?
Honourable Government House Leader.
The Justice Committee has looked at this matter. We know that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner is investigating this matter. We also know that there is an ongoing court case. But let's talk about some numbers, Mr. Speaker. Over 900,000 jobs have been created by Canadians because of investments that this government made. 300,000 children have been lifted out of poverty because of the Canada Child Benefit. 9 million Canadians' income taxes went down because we lowered taxes on middle-class Canadians by increasing them on the wealthiest 1% of Canadians. 900,000 seniors are benefiting from the GIS increase, all measures that the NDP voted against. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable member for Durham.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Foreign Minister. Canada's reputation on the world stage is in tatters. It's so bad that the OECD is investigating the Prime Minister's conduct in the SNC-Lavalin matter. The Minister promised the OECD that there would be an independent investigation into SNC, but today the Minister's Liberal colleagues killed that investigation at the Justice Committee. How does that Minister feel when the Prime Minister throws her under the bus at the OECD?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, the rules-based international order and the multilateral institutions that underpin it are absolutely essential for the pursuit of the Canadian national interest in the world. That is why we are cooperating fully with the OECD in their work on this issue, and I have instructed my department and my staff to do so.
The Honourable Order. The Honourable member for Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister can't have it both ways. She can't tell the OECD that they're cooperating on an independent investigation while her own colleagues are killing the investigation at the Justice Committee. That Minister knows that this type of conduct is more likely in Venezuela or in Russia, not in Canada. That's right. Will this Minister remain silent while her Prime Minister and her own colleagues are abusing the rule of law?
Honourable Minister. Order. The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, as someone who has stood up for the people of Ukraine, as someone who has stood up for the Crimean Tatars, as someone who has stood up for the people of Venezuela, let me say it is...
Order. The Honourable Member for Barrie Innisfil and the Honourable Member for Durham will come to order. Order. I had no trouble hearing the question. I should be able to hear the answer equally well. Order. The Honourable Opposition House Leader will also come to order. The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs has the floor for a few more seconds.
So let me say, it is a profound insult to the people living under the Maduro dictatorship, to the people living under Putin's dictatorship, to compare anything happening in our rule of law country with what
One fewer question. Order. The Honourable Member for St. Albert Edmonton will come to order. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Yes, Mr. Speaker, Canada is back on the international stage with a Liberal scandal. 4 resignations in under 3 months. It's a record. A British newspaper, The Guardian, says that this Liberal scandal is quite a spectacle. And the former Attorney General says the matter is serious and some questions remain unanswered. Why is the Prime Minister so determined to silence her? What is he covering up? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, we waived solicitor-client privilege and cabinet confidence so that the former Attorney General could share her evidence with the committee. The members of that committee asked to hear from a number of witnesses. They did appear. It took 5 weeks for all those meetings to be held. There's also the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner that is looking at this affair. We respect their work and we expect them to be able to complete it.
Mr. Speaker, we're hearing nothing but a consistent effort to try and change the channel from this tired, scandal-plagued government. Right. 2 Liberal ministers have resigned after losing confidence in this Prime Minister. His top advisor and best friend resigned. Now the clerk of the Privy Council resigned. Not surprisingly, the Justice Committee, led by the PMO, shut down the investigation. Exactly. The Prime Minister still denies any wrongdoing, but he's lawyered up and appointed an ad scam era Liberal to convince Canadians to trust him. What's this Prime Minister so desperate to hide?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the Justice Committee has looked into this matter. The Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner is investigating this matter. We know that there is an ongoing court case, Mr. Speaker. And I know that the Conservatives are surprised, but we've always focused on Canadians. That is who we are here to serve. 300,000 children lifted out of poverty because of the Canada Child benefit, tax-free, a benefit that the Conservatives voted against. 900,000 jobs created by Canadians because of our investments, measures that the Conservatives voted against. It's really unfortunate that Conservatives don't want to focus on Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, in the space of 6 weeks, the Prime Minister lost his Minister of Justice, the President of the Treasury Board, his principal advisor, and the clerk of the Privy Council. Wow. So now he's hitting the panic button, and he's calling for help. And who picks up the phone? A former Liberal minister, a Liberal who sat at the cabinet table during the sponsorship scandal, a Liberal who was in cabinet when SNC-Lavalin was giving illegal Liberal donations to the party, a Liberal who next week will be fundraising for the Liberal Party. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister think we're fools? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Ethics Commissioner is looking into this, and we will allow him to do his work. We respect his work. We know that the Justice Committee also did their work. Now, I understand why the Conservatives don't want to speak about Canadians. I mean, the NDP are even sharing their notes too. But since we were elected, more than 900,000 jobs were created for Canadians. More than 300,000 children were lifted out of poverty. 9 million Canadians saw their taxes lowered, and the NDP voted against that. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, do you remember the sponsorship scandal? Well, in Quebec, we remember. Basically, it wasn't complicated. It went like this. You can never do too much for the Liberal Party, friends, and you can change all the rules if it's for the Liberal Party. And today, once again, the same thing is happening. They are desperate to repair broken trust. And so the Prime Minister is calling a Liberal who was deputy leader when Paul Martin was dealing with Gaddafi for his executive friends in SNC. What are the Liberals so afraid of? Why are they refusing to have a public inquiry to get at the truth? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the members of the Justice Committee considered this case. We know that the Ethics Commissioner is also considering this. We trust our institutions. But, Mr. Speaker, do you remember a time when the NDP was asking relevant questions? Well, we on this side of the House deal with relevant issues for Canadians. We are concerned about their problems, but obviously the NDP is continuing to vote against steps that help with housing, help with Canadians, help with children.
For St. John's East. Order.
Mr. Speaker, 3 years ago, recognizing that Atlantic Canada is on the leading edge of a demographic challenge that will create challenges for economic growth across the entire country, our government announced the Atlantic Immigration Pilot. Part of the Atlantic Growth Strategy, the Atlantic Immigration Pilot provides the tools and framework that employers need to settle talented employees and their families in Atlantic Canada. Can the Minister explain how recent changes to the Atlantic Immigration Pilot will continue to strengthen our economic growth?
The Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for his strong advocacy for Atlantic Canada. On a recent visit to the region, I saw firsthand how the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program is literally fueling the economic growth in that part of Canada. And that is why, after listening very carefully to Atlantic Canadians, we've extended the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program by a further 2 years. That will enable us to allow more international graduates to settle and live in Atlantic Canada, attract more internationally trained nurses to practice in Atlantic Canada. Mr. Speaker, unlike the party opposite, on this side of the House...
The Honourable Member for Beauport, Côte-de-Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, Canadians do not like corruption. 4 people have left the PM's close entourage since last January, and he continues to say that nothing happened. Yet the former Attorney General says the opposite. She said that this is serious and that some questions remain unanswered. You know, Mr. Speaker, the more something drags on, the worse it gets. And this story smells of corruption. Canadians want to know the truth. What is the Prime Minister hiding, and what is he so afraid of? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Ethics Commissioner is investigating. We know that he is perfectly able to do that work, and he must be allowed to do that work. Now, we know that the Conservatives do not want to hear the debate on the budget. Today is Budget Day. We know that our plan is working for Canadians. And I think that the Conservatives know that Canadians want to hear their plan, but they don't have a plan, so they're playing politics rather than speaking about measures that would help Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, the former Treasury Board president said she had lost confidence in the government when she resigned. I can relate to that. The Liberals dismissed her resignation, claiming there was still nothing to see. But I know she wouldn't have resigned over nothing. The Prime Minister has sacrificed the rule of law and attacked our democracy. Canadians need the whole truth, not just what he wants us to hear. What is the Prime Minister so afraid of? What is the Prime Minister so desperate to hide?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, since 1987, there's been 4 occasions where cabinet confidence was lifted. This Prime Minister not only waived cabinet confidence, this Prime Minister also waived solicitor-client privilege. Right. Solicitor-client privilege it actually is a factor for attorney generals. During the time that she was the former attorney general, that privilege was lifted so that Canadians could hear. We on this side will focus on Canadians while Conservatives play politics. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Today we learned that SNC-Lavalin bought a $38 million yacht for the son of Muammar Gaddafi in exchange for contracts. I want to go back to this issue with the OECD. The Foreign Affairs Minister watched 2 of her colleagues resign on principle to stand against the Prime Minister and his role in this greasy scandal. Yep. Why is she letting herself be used on the international stage for this abrogation of Canadian democracy?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Order.
Mr. Speaker, I am extremely proud to speak for Canada, to speak for our amazing country on the international stage. And because I wasn't fully heard when the member for Durham posed his astonishing question, let me just say that it is both insulting and absurd to the people of Canada, as well as to the people suffering from the dictatorship of Maduro and Putin, to make any comparison between our countries.
Honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
What is insulting and absurd is that this government stands up day after day and gives cover for insulting Canadian democratic institutions for a company that bought prostitutes for Muammar Gaddafi's son. Every single one of these ministers that stands up, the Justice Committee today, the Liberal members that gave this Prime Minister quarter, need to be ashamed of themselves. The Foreign Affairs Minister of all women in this caucus who stands on behalf of Canada should get this right. Why is she giving this Prime Minister?
Order. The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, since the member has spoken about women and foreign affairs, let me talk about what our government is doing to advance the rights of women in the world. Let me talk about what we are doing to stand up for women's rights activists in Saudi Arabia. Let me talk about what we are doing to stand up for reproductive health and access to reproductive health services for all the women in Canada and the world.
The Honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
It was just a few days ago the Prime Minister's office promised the anti-bribery unit of the OECD that the Liberals would host, quote, robust hearings into the allegations of the former Attorney General, and today they shut those hearings down to keep the former Attorney General from speaking. And to change the channel, the Prime Minister is bringing back Sheila Kopp's old seatmate from the sponsorship scandal, Anne McLeod, who's presently raising money for the Liberal Party. You can't appoint someone who's raising cash for the Liberals to reassure Canadians that Liberals aren't breaking the law. Doesn't the Prime Minister understand this? Who's giving him his advice these days?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, these are definitely tactics and approaches I expect from the Conservatives, but the NDP definitely should, I would say, return to what they used to once fight for. I'm not sure why they've forgotten their ways, but we are going to fight for Canadians. We're going to fight for jobs, Mr. Speaker, and we know that our plan is working. But when it comes to that member's question, the Honourable Anne McLeod has supported and encouraged women to run as candidates across all political parties for a really long time. We know that we need more women to run for office, and that member also knows that the Honourable Anne McLeod will not be at that fundraiser now that she's accepted this role.
Honourable Member. The order. The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
She canceled the fundraiser. How did we come from sunny ways to these dog show days? This Prime Minister promised to be an ethical alternative to the backroom control of Stephen Harper and the cronyism of Jean Chrétien, and he's proven to be the worst of both. And he's burning through his credibility here by trying to shut down the investigation into SNC. So let's put it simple. This is about leadership. This is about integrity. This is about the rule of law. Doesn't the Prime Minister understand that, or does he just not care?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, that question and the preamble prior to it was entirely misleading, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Anne McLeod was attending an event. She will no longer be attending that event now that she's taken on.
Order.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Côte de Beaupré, come to order.
Come to order. We need to hear both the questions and the answers. Let's show a little respect for each other here and for this place. Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Calgary Signal Hill will come to order. Order. The Honourable Member for Carleton. The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Speaker, the Deputy Leader of the Conservatives asked the former Attorney General, can you tell us what you discussed with the Prime Minister at your meetings in Vancouver on February 11th? Answer, I cannot. Can you tell us what was discussed with the Cabinet on February 19th? Answer, I cannot. Mr. Speaker, what happened in those meetings that was so egregious and disgraceful that the Prime Minister feels he has to cover it all up?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, the Justice Committee has looked into this matter. The Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner is investigating this matter. There is an ongoing court case, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to the two dates that member is asking about, the former Attorney General was not the Attorney General on those dates. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Carleton. Order.
That's exactly how they justified banning her from speaking about the events that she witnessed during that time. And we know those events must have been egregious. So egregious that she felt she had to resign. But when the Deputy Conservative Leader asked, can you tell us why you resigned? The answer, I cannot. Now, we simply asked for her to come back and finish the rest of the story. Today, we had a motion to do that, but the Prime Minister shut down the Justice Committee investigation. What is so egregious and ugly that the Prime Minister needed to cover it all up?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, the matter before the Justice Committee was in regards to her time as Attorney General. So the Prime Minister waived solicitor-client privilege for her time as Attorney General. The Prime Minister waived cabinet confidence for her time as the Attorney General. That's exactly what took place. But the member basically is on a fishing trip. Then the member can choose to play their politics of division and what they do, but we'll focus on Canadians. We're going to focus on the 300,000 children that have been lifted out of poverty, and we're hoping that even more are with our plan. Yes. Thank you.
The honourable member for Carleton.
When the Globe and Mail first reported about this scandal, the Prime Minister said it was all a lie. That's right. And he said proof is that his Attorney General was still in Cabinet. Yeah. Right. Well, the next day, she resigned. And then he said, oh, I'm disappointed in her. That's just her problem. Yeah. And then his Treasury Board President resigned. And then he said, well, that's just the two of them. But then the head of the entire public service resigned. What is going on behind the scenes that is so egregious that everyone has to resign that this Prime Minister is covering up today?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
The Justice Committee looked at this matter. We believe that Canadians should get to hear from witnesses, and that's exactly why the Prime Minister waived solicitor-client privilege for her time as Attorney General. That's exactly why the Prime Minister waived cabinet confidence for her time as Attorney General. The matter that was in front of the Justice Committee was in regard to her time as Attorney General, because Canadians should get to hear. The Prime Minister actually also addressed the nation and answered questions from the media because he recognized that we can always improve on our institutions, and that's the leadership he's demonstrated, and that's the work we'll continue to do.
The honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Indian Day School system is a dark and shameful chapter in Canadian history. What many Canadians don't know is since 1920, over 200,000 Indigenous children were forced to attend these schools. Many of them were mistreated, abused, and robbed of their cultural identity. Last week, the proposed settlement agreement was announced with some of the survivors of the Indian Day School. Can the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations update this House on what his proposed settlement means for their survivors, their families?
The Honourable Minister.
I thank the member from Kildonan St. Paul's for her question and for her commitment to reconciliation. I was honoured to announce the proposed settlement agreement with the McLean class members. As well as compensation, the proposed settlement includes $200 million legacy fund in memory of the late Gary McLean to support wellness, healing, education, culture, and commemoration. Nothing can undo the harms of the past, but this will bring us one step closer to lasting and meaningful resolution for survivors and their communities.
The honourable member for Montmagny-Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, the former Attorney General wants to speak because this is a serious matter and some questions have not been answered. The Liberals sitting on the Justice Committee, a so-called independent committee, have been using tactics under the Prime Minister's orders to prevent her from speaking. Canadians who are asking for answers are going to have to settle with a sham of an inquiry led by a former deputy leader, Liberal deputy leader. What a joke. What is it that the Liberals are trying to hide? The Honourable Government House Leader, Mr. Speaker, the members sitting on the Justice Committee did their work. The Prime Minister waived solicitor-client privilege and cabinet confidence for the period of time when she was Attorney General. That's what the committee considered. And that's exactly why the Prime Minister waived those two types of confidences. Now, we can see that the Conservatives don't really want to talk about the 300,000 children who have been lifted out of poverty. They don't want to talk. The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When friends of the Liberals ask for something, well, they get a new law through the back door, several meetings, and pressure to change the mind of the former Attorney General. But our dairy producers in our regions get nothing. Furthermore, our food sovereignty was sacrificed in the 3 free trade agreements signed by the Liberal government. Why are the Liberals spending all their time working for their own interest rather than working for dairy producers and regions in Quebec? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, our country has stood up for supply management. The Americans wanted to dismantle it. We are currently working with processors, dairy producers, poultry producers in order to find the best way to fully and fairly support them so that they will be able to innovate, prosper, and be ready for future generations. We continue to stand up for supply management for our producers, for processors, and for rural communities. The Honourable Member for Brome-Missisquoi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everybody knows how committed I am to the environment. Our drinking water supply and water treatment networks are essential for the health and sustainability of our communities. Our government has made investments that will enable municipalities to maintain their facilities and access sufficient funding for their needs. Will the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities update the House on this government's recent investments in water facilities in Quebec municipalities? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to begin by thanking the member for Brome-Missisquoi for his question and for his excellent work. I was recently in Bécancour to announce a joint investment with the province of $4.6 million to replace the current wastewater treatment system and to build a new pump station in Sainte-Eulalie. These are vital investments in Quebec and in Canada to build more sustainable and green communities and to prepare them for future growth. Mr. Speaker, we have plans for our regions and we will continue to improve the quality of the lives of Canadians throughout the country. Thank you.
Barry Innisfil.
In about an hour, the Liberals are going to try to flip the switch on this scandal, but there's no way to overstate how the level of corruption and the state of the cover-up caused by the actions of the Prime Minister and his office have created a crisis of confidence. This morning, that crisis of confidence in the ability for the institution of Parliament to do its job peaked when the Liberals shut down the committee. Clearly, the Attorney General has more to say and wants to, but the Prime Minister is controlling her by not letting her speak again. What's the Prime Minister so afraid of, and what is he desperately trying to cover up?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say finally a question on the budget. The Conservatives said the word budget on Budget Day. Mr. Speaker, we're hoping so that today's budget will get to continue to build on the plan that we have been fighting for to make sure that Canadians are better off today than when we took office 3.5 years ago, Mr. Speaker. 300,000 children lifted out of poverty because of Canada Child Benefit, a tax-free measure that helps families with children that need it the most. Canadians created 900,000 jobs because of our investments. Today, small businesses have the lowest small business tax rate at 9%, all measures that the Conservatives voted against.
The Honourable Member for Terrebonne. Mr. Speaker, Francophones are not being respected by this government. The proof? The treatment of Francophones in our armed forces. There are specialized courses that lead to promotion, including in intelligence and special forces, but they're only available in English. If they want to be promoted and specialize, Francophone members have to often abandon their own language and work in English. What is the government waiting to respect our military women and men and provide their training in French? The Honourable Minister of Official Languages. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to answer my colleague on the fair treatment of Francophones in our armed forces. I'd like to remind him that we reinvested in the Military College of Saint-Jean in order to ensure that our armed forces members would have access to training, whereas that training had been prevented by the former Conservative government. So once again, we are showing our leadership in this country, contrary to the former Conservative government. We will be protecting Francophones in this country. The Honourable Member for Terrebonne. Mr. Speaker, it was his government that closed the college. Francophones are not respected by this government, and the proof is how Francophones are treated in the mounted police. Over the past 5 years, there has not been a single promotion for Francophone members of the RCMP, for unilingual Francophone members. Why is this government accepting that Francophones in Quebec and Canada be treated as second-class citizens within the RCMP? What are they waiting for to provide equality for the Francophone members? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have no lessons to take from the Bloc Québécois when it comes to the protection of Francophones in this country. If my colleague is so concerned about bilingualism in the federal government, I would invite him to participate in our consultations on the modernization of the Official Languages Act. Now, we recognize the fact that we must stand up for official bilingualism and the right of Francophones to work. It is the first Trudeau government, 1969, that came up with the official bilingualism, and it is a Trudeau government that is going to move forward with bilingualism. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Prime Minister. His apology for abuse suffered 70 years ago by Inuit TB patients was appreciated. Today, the rate of TB among Inuit is 290 times that of non-Indigenous Canadians, and we know why. A severe shortage of housing creates overcrowding, and that is a major cause of TB in Nunavut. Previously announced funding, although sounding good, doesn't even provide for 2 houses per community per year. Will he commit to action today, provide adequate funding to alleviate the severe housing crisis and make a real difference? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for the question. We are committed to working with our partners specifically to address tuberculosis amongst Indigenous populations, and particularly in the North. We're working with Indigenous partners and governments, provincial and territorial, and supporting innovative and community-led approaches. We are working with partners to eliminate tuberculosis across Inuit Nunangat by 2030 and reduce active tuberculosis by at least 50% by 2025. And we will continue to work with our Indigenous partners to address that rate of tuberculosis in a distinctions-based and a culturally safe way, which will most definitely include housing.